Great. I just wanted to say thanks to everybody for joining us on the webinar today. My name is Dale Medeiros. I'm a senior regional planner for the Northern Virginia Regional Commission. We're a regional council of governments representing the 13 counties, cities, and towns, 2.6 million people in Northern Virginia. And today we have the privilege of organizing this webinar with our guest, Alexander Kustler, the head of strategy for EcoStar, based in Munich, Germany. And today we're going to focus on the programs and policies in Germany that are affecting battery storage systems, distributed generation, and particularly as they relate to data centers, but not just necessarily data centers, other top, energy consumers as well. And the reasons that electricity prices are rising, the grid's becoming more congested and stressed, and the demand for electricity is increasing, due in part to applications of AI and the operations of data centers. And we have the highest concentration of data centers in the world. And at the same time, local governments in Northern Virginia are trying to reduce their carbon footprint, sustain economic growth, and with the elimination of federal tax credits to incentivize renewable energy such as solar and wind, it's further complicated energy supply demand and resiliency. However, the approval in 2025 of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act largely preserved tax credits for battery energy storage systems and manufacturing incentives through 2033. And just today, I read that three Virginia electric utilities were adding battery energy storage systems to their electricity distribution networks this year to increase the reliability of their electric service. So it's a big topic. Across the Atlantic, Germany's been confronting similar energy, climate, and economic challenges, but also has developed a variety of innovative policies to integrate battery energy storage systems that help meet the needs of data centers and support distributed generation. So allow me to share with you a little bit about our guest. Alexander Kuster is the head of strategy for EcoStar in Munich, Germany. EcoStar is a developer and operator of large-scale stationary battery energy storage systems across Europe, and they focus on integrating renewable energy and stabilizing power grids. From Munich, Alexander's core responsibilities at EcoStar include shaping and moderating the strategy process, identifying new business opportunities, and developing scalable business models in the energy storage sector. In addition, he coordinates the value chain, manages M&A processes all across project phases, and is accountable for the commercial success of projects within asset management. He's got more than 15 years of experience in the electricity sector, particularly the European transmission system operator environment. He's also played a key role in building the leading regional coordination center for transmission systems operators. He's helped lead transformation processes and successfully manage multinational teams. Alexander has a degree in electrical engineering and information technology, an executive MBA in innovation and business creation from the TU Munich, which included a stay in Berkeley, California. He is a Renaissance man that combines technical expertise with entrepreneurial and strategic competence. So, Alexander, thank you so much. Before we turn the floor over to you, Alexander, just a note of housekeeping. Alexander's going to run through his presentation, his slide deck, and at any time when you wish, please park questions into the Q&A. We hope to have at least 20, 25 minutes of discussion. I always find it much more beneficial when there's an engagement and exchange. But if you wish and you would even feel more comfortable speaking, please just send me a message and I'll be happy to unmute you. So Alexander, the floor is yours. Thank you very much for taking your time to be with us today, talk with us about this really important topic.
Well, thank you, Dana. I feel really honored to be here. Yeah, I feel it's going to be a great opportunity to spice up your lunch break now. Let me see. Let me get the screen sharing ready. Can everybody see the screen?
Yeah.
Okay. Perfect. Wonderful. Yeah, it's a very lengthy title. And I think I should use like 20, 25 minutes. And as Dale mentioned, I really hope for an engaged discussion afterwards. I want to shorten the title a little bit because I actually brought you a little play, and I label it the flexibility crisis. Because ultimately, my pitch is going to be there's not an energy or a capacity crisis. there's actually a flexibility crisis. And that little play has like, I think, three main actors. And I'm going to walk you through that a little bit, presenting first what is the core, the macro challenge at hand, highlight a little bit what are the pain points of the key actors before I'm going to introduce the solution, and then zoom in a little bit of what's going to be the benefit of the three main actors and what are the takeaways. So I think Dale already indicated a little bit. So in fact, the electricity system, it's an old design for a new reality. So for most of the last century, electricity grids maintained the delicate real-time balance between supply and demand almost entirely by adjusting generation. So when demand rose, power plants ramped up. When it fell, they ramped down. So this model worked because two assumptions held true. First, demand grew slowly and predictably. Second, generation assets were built to be controllable and frequency cycled. So today, neither of those two assumptions hold true. And demand today is increasing, driven by large digitally native loads that scale quickly and operate erratically. So what you see on the curve here is just how the global demand rose. I mean, the really nice message underneath is the same degree like demand rose, actually the build-up of particularly solar and other clean renewable energy sources across the globe scaled with it, and has actually kept up pace so that fossil use stays almost flat. Now, at the same time, much of the new generation being added to the system is, whether that's highly efficient thermal plants or low-cost renewable sources, is optimized for steady output and not rapid load following. So the grid is now being asked to operate under conditions its architecture was never designed to accommodate. Now, electricity demand is rising faster and changing more abruptly than at any point in modern history. So AI workloads, hyperscale data centers, and the accelerating electrification of the economy are driving sharp increase in power consumption, while simultaneously compressing these timelines available to plan and build new infrastructure. And now it feels a little bit like preaching to the choir, but if you look at the numbers of IEA, so the capex spending of those large data centers in the US was, I think in 25, like around about 400 billion, and it's going to grow by 75% in 26. But it's not only US phenomenon. I mean, also the first time in history, Germany has a federal data center strategy. And the claim here is to double data center capacity by 2030 and actually quadruple AI-specific data center capacity by 2030. So faced with this pressure, much of the energy debate has settled on a familiar answer: build more generation. However, this misdiagnoses the fundamental challenge the grid is actually facing. So the constraint facing today's power system is not a shortage of energy, it is a shortage of flexibility, right? I mean, in the previous chart, you've seen the growth of demand is actually well accompanied by a growth of renewable energy generation. However, the grid's greatest challenge is no longer how much energy it can produce, but how quickly and precisely it can respond to rapid changes in demand. And until we address that constraint directly by simply adding more generation, we'll only treat the symptoms and not the cause. So here we are tackling the flexibility crisis. Now let's go ahead. Oh, sorry, I missed that one. Let's go ahead and introduce the first main actor of that play, which is the data center. Now, it's the most prominent driver, but actually it is not the fastest growing, let's say, asset class that drives electricity demand. Now, I'm not sure if participants can now... Oh no, Dale, you said everybody's muted, right? So I cannot make a little quiz. Maybe do that later.
Yeah.
Okay. So For the data center, the prime interest is time to market. Time to market is crucial for competitiveness, and especially in the fast-moving tech industry. So wait time for grid connection is therefore an important criterion for site selection of new data centers. But long connection queues are becoming increasingly coming across Europe as system operators struggle to allocate capacity to new users and deterring data center developers. And when you look at the graph here, it's taken from an IEA report that outlines what are the most critical bottlenecks data center developers are facing today. 4 out of the 6 actually grid assets. So it's really the grid assets that become the determining factor, and that provides one big challenge for the data center, because now if without access or the classic access to the grid, they have two choices. So either they enter into flexible connection agreements with the grid operator, which they actually don't really can accommodate, or second, it's called bring your own capacity or bring your own generation on site and build generation assets on site. So problem number one, not getting grid access fast enough and meeting firm and redundancy requirements. But also, data centers are the single biggest user of electricity, and they're extremely concentrated. Not like the historical boom of, for instance, air conditioning or household loads that hit the grid in a much more diffused form. So people are becoming more afraid that data centers will drive up electricity and infrastructure costs. And that might be true. But also it's one of the biggest long-term operational expenses, power cost for the data center. And there's a third one. Also, the massive hunger for electricity, natural gas with their on-site gas gensets and water is fueling a sustainability pressure that can't be ignored. And in some cases, even leading to citizen initiatives that prohibit building permits being issued, like in California, but there are also cases in Germany. So so what are the three main implications for the data centers? It's basically hardly possible to get redundant and firm grid access in the classic, let's say, growth markets that we have in Europe. They call it the FLAP-D. So it's Frankfurt, London, Amsterdam, Paris, and Dublin. At the same time, local acceptance is crumbling. Let's come to the second key actor here. So for the grid operator, and I'm going to zoom in a little bit on the transmission system operator, because those are the four big operators in Germany, and in the US there are 3. So let's start first with 2 fantastic facts. So worldwide, for the first time in modern history, renewables replaced coal as the prime electricity source. Well, actually, it's the second time. The last time it happened, it was in 1919. So that's quite a long period. The second good fact, in Germany, over 50% of the of the generation is renewable. So spoiler alert, this happened before. But okay, but this is good, but what does it mean for the power system? Remember my claim from before? It's an old design for a new reality. In a nutshell, renewables mean volatility. So the rise of renewables triggered a lot of infrastructure demand. Now, what does volatility actually mean, and what does it look like? So let's look, here's a short view back to what was the power system like 15 years ago. So the good old past days. What you can see on the picture, the blue picture here, is on the horizontal axis. Basically, it spans across the time frame of a year. And on the vertical axis, you see the 24 hours of the day. And the colors indicate the day ahead prices for a megawatt hour. So blue means relatively cheap energy, red means relatively expensive. Now, as you see back in the good old days, it was almost like a blue ocean, right? But fast forward 15 years further, you see the picture dramatically changed. And what you can see here is that on the vertical axis, you see kind of like two red lines. These are basically the classic duck curve you see also for instance, in other markets in the US, where electricity prices are really high during periods of high demand. That's usually at the morning peak and you have the evening peak. And then in the middle of the day, what's also now in the middle of the picture, you see this really, the blue ocean still exists and energy is actually really, really cheap. And that's why, and the reason for that is that's simply where you see the peak PV infeed, just dramatically lowering the price of electricity. And actually, in many, many periods of the year, you already have negative prices during the noon hours. So right now, as we speak, it's a wonderful example, perfectly sunshine outside. And actually last weekend, we had a really crazy situation where over the duration of, I think it was half the Saturday and half the Sunday, price spreads or the negative price peak hit over minus 500 euros per megawatt hour. So that means if you would consume electricity, somebody's giving you 550 euros per hour per megawatt hour. It's absolutely insane. Now, having said that, this creates a huge opportunity for BESS, right? So with a battery asset, you can suck up all this free, or actually you get paid for storing that free energy during the day, and then you get compensated for feeding it back to the grid during the evening hours. That was wonderful, or still is a good business case for batteries, and that was recognized by battery developers. So, and they, on top of the renewable sources that wanted to get connected to the grid in the years before, created a tremendous demand for new infrastructure. Now, there were a lot of battery developers that were, let's say, rather put forward speculative connection requests. And then later on, you saw even a huge spike of data centers requesting grid access, as you've seen also in Northern Virginia. And as an example number, how the situation is in Germany, so Tenet, one of the big TSOs, they reported in 2021, 22, they got 5 connection requests for a data center. Just 1 year later, it was already 500 requests. So now it has been almost 2 years of crazy inflated connection queues at the TSOs. And now they actually took action to clean out that massive queue. And that's something we also see in other markets in the UK, in the US, where grid operators implement a grid reform. So in Germany, what they did is mainly 2 big changes. A, most of the customers connected to the grid will only receive flexible connection agreements. So the time is over for firm capacity. Secondly, they put in place a system that is maturity based. That means if you can demonstrate progress of realizing your project, you will get ahead of the queue. Now, what does that mean for the grid operators? So what we've seen as an implication is large loads are now competing for grid assets. So you have all the different BESS actors, all the different data center actors. And actually the grid is becoming the prime bottleneck for those actors. And the grid reform actually leads to the situation that there's only flexible connection agreements and maturity-based grid access. Now let's go to the third player actually. So the good news first. Batteries. So since 2010, remember this good old picture with the big blue ocean. Since then, prices of batteries have actually fallen by 90%. So that's fundamentally changing the costs of flexibility at scale. So with batteries surging, we're entering an era of 24/7 solar. And you'll often hear that solar is great, but the sun doesn't shine at night. That's a fair point. But in the last 10 years, the battery costs have dropped from $440 to $70 per kilowatt hour. And actually, if you zoom into the chart in the 2025, they've sunk 45% alone. So that leads to the fact that global battery capacity is accelerating at a crazy pace. So in 25, actually, 247 gigawatt hours of battery capacity have been added to the grid. And this would be enough to shift 14% of the added daily solar generation from daytime to other hours. So really entering an era of 24/7 solar night. However, there are challenges in Germany. We've built up a massive grid queue with lots of speculative projects that hinder those projects that want to show real progress. And there's a huge uncertainty, regulatory uncertainty. So today, if projects that are brought online until August 2029, they're battery projects, they're actually exempt from grid tariffs. So that means there's a huge rush now for everything where you can get a grid access pre-2029. So that leads to really quite of a delay of investment, because everything that gets, let's say, is earmarked for an energization 2029 plus is put on hold. And also you have this huge cannibalization of best projects pre-2029. Okay, so now we understand the greater flexibility crisis. We are familiar with the main actors, but what is the solution? So where's the light at the end of the tunnel? So without further ado, here's the solution, and we label it Energy Hub. So while our three main actors are individually constrained, they're structurally complementary and creating a multi-win situation that creates a shared value beyond the three players. So what is our Energy Hub? So our Energy Hub, in a nutshell, is a behind-the-meter integration using a shared grid connection with assets that have a complementary load profile. Of course, the hidden hero here is the battery asset. Of course, it's a presentation of a battery developer. And I'm going to show you why. So basically what this Energy Hub does, it effectively turns a static interconnection, it turns a non-firm grid access into firm capacity for the data centers. And that allows new loads to be connected within existing infrastructure limits. And so faster connection by bypassing grid bottlenecks. You might wonder, that sounds a little bit too good to be true. But how does grid access today work? So if there's a grid access request put forward to the TSO checks whether it can supply that asset for 100%, so 8,760 hours of the year without creating any bottlenecks. And it's very much likely that there are a couple of hours throughout the year, those really highly congested traffic jam hours, where it cannot provide the new grid asset can guarantee that it's not congested. So basically what then the TSO does is says, sorry guys, we got to build out the substation before we can give access to you guys. Now, if we can turn that around and say, well, we actually might not need 100% of all the hours throughout the year, 100% capacity, we might be flexible a couple of 100 hours throughout the year because we have a BESS asset on site that can cover us during those few hours during the year. We might be able to get grid access way faster. Actually, the IEA put out a report that said by 2030, they expect to have 20 to 25 gigawatt of battery storage installed, co-located to a data center. Now, I'm not going to sign that claim, but I want to highlight a little bit what is that multi-win situation now for all the different players. Okay, let's dive a little bit into the situation for all these 5 players connected here. So, what does the energy hub create for the grid operator? Well, the grid operator wins because there's going to be an asset connected to the grid that actually demonstrated flexibility. So it's not a firm asset, it's an asset that could actually also support congestion management for the grid operator. Also, like we said, hey, we are the asset doesn't need to be need to receive 100% firm capacity throughout the whole year. The grid operator might be able to defer grid extensions and save money on the infrastructure side. So for the data center, getting faster time to energy means faster time to revenue. But also then, with having the co-located BESS asset and the, let's say, green baseload PPA, we can also provide a lower cost of energy and also, let's say, energy or an electricity supply contract with a lower CO2. For the BESS asset, that means more revenue streams besides the existing market and also less regulatory dependency. So these are the 3 main actors, but actually more. So also the renewables benefit from higher capture prices and a reduced curtailment. And now overall, the general public or the local municipality will benefit from lower system costs from the deferred infrastructure, but also higher renewable energy integration. That almost sounds a bit too good to be true. And that's why I'm going to briefly reflect on what is actually the happy ending here for the 3 main players. Okay, so we have an unprecedented load growth and an influx of volatile generation. And that crisis we are claiming to be able to tackle with flexibility. But how does that happy ending actually look like for the grid operator? So we said better utilization of grid assets and a deferred or reduced infrastructure investment. So if you think about the traffic jam analysis again, there are only very few hours of the year or of the day where either the highway system, the streets, or the electricity grid is actually facing a congestion. Now, according to the International Energy Agency, they believe that if we can make that data center demand flexible between 0.1 to 1% of the year, that there's enough room in the current electricity system to integrate all new data centers. Now, I think that's a very bold claim, but the core message is certainly true. A flexible connection agreement helps loads to get connected to the grid fast while delivering a benefit for the grid operator. But there's also an operational advantage for the grid operator. Like I mentioned in the beginning, increase of flexibility. So what's the benefit for the operator operationally? Well, they could use the energy hub asset to reduce curtailment and lower redispatch costs. And we think like, okay, that's a nice claim, but how does it actually happen? Well, here's a German example, not from a textbook or study, but it's actually a real life asset that has been in operation for roughly a year. And it's actually Germany's largest BESS asset that was built and is owned by EcoStore. Now, what you can actually see here, what we integrated is that the local grid operator indicated, hey guys, I have a tremendous issue with renewables in the system. And if you want to connect your battery asset to the grid, you have to ensure that if the PV in feed reaches a certain threshold, that you can basically suck up all the, let's say, the excess solar energy in the grid to avoid that we have a benefit. That we have a bottleneck in the network. If you can do that, if you can claim you can do that, and you're not kind of like adding more stress to the system, we're happy to connect you. And that's basically what we demonstrated that we can do with our best asset. So we actually built a digital twin of the grid connection point, analyzed what is the grid conditions that cause a bottleneck for the DSO, and implemented rules for our best asset, how to proactively change its operation to ensure there's no bottleneck in the grid. So I just wanna highlight a little bit. So you see here the 80% mark. What was the let's say one of the flags where the DSO indicated in those situations, your best asset needs to ramp down, and you can see here as let's say the red curve, how it is immediately followed, and the BESS is actually increasing its power draw from the grid. Now, this was just a single BESS asset, and it's in operation, so it's not just a paper, but we could do the exact same for that co-location case for the energy hub. So what is the strategic upside for the TSO in a nutshell? Well, actually, we can help them to clean up the grid queue by basically consolidating multiple players behind one single grid access. We can support the energy transition and actually help them in the transition to a more flexibility-based grid model. Now, what is the happy ending for the data center? So for the data center, the core value driver is time to power, because that means time to revenue. Now, you would ask, the question of course is, so why is it not cost of energy? I mean, they consume a lot of energy. Isn't that the first core value driver? Now, I picked up a nice illustration from LinkedIn, where the yellow dot you can see in the middle now, that's the electricity cost for running a 1 gigawatt AI cluster in Texas. So it's around about $80,000 per hour. And then you can see the huge black ball, which is 50 million, or it represents the revenue of that AI cluster, which is $50 million per hour. And then it becomes very clear that they don't care about the energy supply cost. So for the data center, time to power, that's the key value driver. If we can shorten that by a couple of years, that's going to be the main driver. Nevertheless, at a certain point, when the marginal costs of intelligence fall to the cost of energy in a couple of years, then for the data center, you really want the most efficient and cost-efficient energy setup possible. Now, when paired with renewables, storage, battery systems can actually deliver firm, clean energy for large, guaranteed portions of the day, potentially around the clock, depending on the duration of the battery and renewable generation. Now, what you can see here on the slide is now a recent analysis from Lazar showing that utility-scale solar paired with storage can deliver electricity at the costs comparable to and often lower than new gas peaking plants. Now, that comparison matters because peakers exist almost exclusively to provide short duration capacity, and that's exactly the role storage is designed to fill. Now, these numbers are US-based. They're not incorporating any tax incentives that are in place. In Europe, the cost advantage for renewables paired with storage is even better, since the cost of natural gas and CO2 certificates, significantly worsen the case for gas plants. So for a data center, meeting those sustainability and ESG requirements could mean a real operational advantage. But besides those numbers, there's a huge strategic upside. Now, I said, due to the grid constraints, there's no growth possibility in 3 out of the 5 core markets in Europe in the FLAP-D. So if we can bring in an energy hub and turn data centers into flexible loads, that would allow them to actually turn power from a constraint to a competitive advantage, right? And then suddenly we could build data centers where others can't build. On top of that, we would reduce the opposition risk versus a traditional data center only design. So what is coming to the third and last key player here? So what is the happy ending for the BESS? Well, for the BESS, one of the core value drivers is that we see more revenue streams coming in from just the actual flexibility asset from the open market, but you could also provide a PPA service to the data center. But also, there's a huge operational advantage. It's the co-optimization of workload shifting and utilizing unused capacity that there might be during a normal ramp up of a data center site. Now, that seems a bit contradictory. That we said in the beginning, everybody's fighting for grid access and grid capacity. But actually, today, a classic data center site, there's plenty of capacity left. So there's a really good IEA report. It's called Key Questions on the Energy and AI. And that backs up the claim that even the most efficient hyperscale data centers are roughly using only 75% of their nameplate grid capacity. Now, if it's a classic co-location data center, it's even less. It's around about 55%. And if that data center is still in the ramp-up phase or the startup phase, it's even close to 20%. And that's not even accounting for the redundancy aspect. So there's a huge amount of unused grid capacity that if we co-locate a data center next to a BESS asset, that can be wonderfully used by the BESS and generate further revenues and act as a little, let's say, it's a green baseload energy provider. So that means for the BESS operator, instead of just having a single BESS asset, the BESS asset becomes the core orchestrator of the energy hub and is way less prone to BESS regulatory aspects. Now, a little bit of a side story about EcoStore. So why are we looking at this? Well, EcoStore is, I think, the only one who is a fully integrated flexibility provider in Germany. So we're actually one of the largest that develop, build, and operate utility scale BESS. So basically what we do is we turn this into that, into that. So we have 200 megawatts of operational assets right now. We have 400 megawatts under construction and roughly 7 gigawatts in our pipeline. On top of that, we've built the software layer to integrate large BESS into the energy grid. And that we can utilize to turn data centers into flexible grid assets. And so, but we are not only doing this because it's a great business case, but our mission is actually to realize the energy transition in Germany. And with every 100 megawatt BESS asset that we build, that leads to a reduction of 50,000 tons CO2 per year. And one of our focus is shared value. So we would like to align incentives for the energy transition. And that's now, everybody could make that claim, but it was an EcoStore initiative that that led to a change in the trade law taxation of BESS assets in 2025. So based on our initiative, the tax law was changed so that BESS asset operators would actually have 90% of their revenues taxed where the asset is built and not where the company is registered. So that also local municipalities would actually have a real benefit of the assets built in their backyard. So, and like you've seen the, let's say the price development of the battery assets. So that was actually, we were hugely benefiting from, let's say the rise of e-mobility that drove down the costs of battery assets. And we now believe that we have a second opportunity in front of our heads. And that's like riding the coattails of the AI revolution and enabling data centers and enabling more sustainable grid responsive data centers. So for us, this is actually with the Energy Hub case, we have the opportunity to decarbonize the massively growing industry and utilize existing grid infrastructure much better, and also strengthen the digital sovereignty and economic competitiveness of Germany. And like I said before, we believe that's a very unique multi-win scenario. So what are the key takeaways here? Don't treat storage as backup. Treat it as a multi-use infrastructure asset. Enable the revenue stacking early and avoid single-use regulatory silos. Align local, state, and agility incentives because fragmentation slows deployment more than technology limits. And also rethink the data center role from a passive load to an active grid participant. So in a nutshell, Germany builds storage to manage renewables, but Northern Virginia will need storage to manage demand. But in both cases, the solution is the same: flexibility. Thank you very much.
That was fantastic. Thank you so much. That was really enlightening. We have our first questions from Joe Lurch, who asks, what is the life cycle of today's current BESS technology? And what are the opportunities to
Yes.
recycle the materials that make up a BESS?
So the projects we deliver, we plan for a life cycle of 30 years, and we expect that the life cycle of the batteries actually 15 years. So after 15 years, we would do a retrofit and bring in new batteries. Recycling is not yet, let's say, an established case in Europe, because fun fact is, so EcoStore was founded around the idea of using second life batteries for utility scale grid storage, so recycling or using old car batteries. But then with the cost degradation of new batteries, that case for now became obsolete.
Yeah.
But it's certainly going to be a case in the future.
I want to pick up on the last slide that you had, which was don't treat storage as backup, treat it as a multi-use infrastructure. And then you close with the quote, Germany built storage to manage renewables. Northern Virginia will need storage to manage demand. But in both cases, the solution is the same flexibility. We have this really interesting challenge where I think there's something like close to 10,000 permitted diesel backup generators in Northern
Yeah.
Virginia. And I read a report where it's projected, I think, and this needs to be fact checked, obviously, but I think it's projected to go up to 25,000 by 2033. And I'm reminded too of a graph that I could share later that I think on average, Germany loses 12 minutes per year to blackouts. We lose something close to 330, something approximating that. So in the context of this very ambitious goal of doubling the applications of AI and adding renewables to the mix by 2033 as part of your data center strategy, do you think you're actually going to make all of this work? And here's my real question. Do you think you're going to make that number of 12 minutes lost per hour sink before 2033? uh, or
So
increase?
yeah, so I think the 12 minute, that's an interesting time, or it's an interesting number. Um, in my in my life, I think the last power outage I've recognized was, I want to say, like 30 years ago. Um, and the so I'm not sure where the 12 minutes are coming from, but the likelihood that if you're connected to the high voltage grid, you actually see a power outage is I would say practically non-existent. Of course, there was now the Iberian blackout last year. Um, but besides that, um, there is practically no case besides a blackout that is really going to impact your security of supply. Now, and then my typical response is, well, if there's really a blackout, well, what you're going to do with your data center, with your calculation anyway? There is no off taker, right? Then this is simply, the problem is getting so big. There's no communication anymore. It's going to be a significant blackout. It only happens like every couple of decades. Um, but you know, your grid connection is not going to fail because there's a single line tripping or anything like that. That's just not the real life scenario here. So in my head, the I would argue that this classic I think requirement that you see, like you need to have enough diesel on site for 72 hours of backup. I don't think that's the case. If you're connected in Europe to the high voltage network, I mean, this doesn't make any sense. I mean, I'm sure the customers will put it forward because that's what they are used to, but I really don't see the case for that. And I'm really
Interesting.
arguing against it. But of course, I'm just a battery supplier, and I would argue, hey, if you really reap all the other benefits, the little bit of backup that you need on site is going to be a byproduct, almost like a byproduct of your assets that you have anyway. And yeah, I don't think you would build any diesel gensets here anymore.
Jeffrey Cohn writes, do you see more opportunity for grid scale batteries or VPP style batteries in homes and small businesses that are networked?
Absolutely, yes. I think that's the. I had that as a little quiz question in the beginning where I said, "Hey, what do you guys think is um, the actually the fastest growing sector or loads, or what is really driving the load growth?" Because it's actually not data centers. E-mobility is growing twice as fast as data centers on a global scale. But of course, the news are made by data centers, right? So this is the wonderful development that you see a huge amount of distributed storage, and Germany has run some pilots on how to make that usable for the grid operator, so we can actually um, augment the power draw. And there have been wonderful pilot projects done, and I think that's going to be a wonderful complementation to utility grid scale storage. That's going to be just much more distributed in the grid, and I think that's really a phenomenal opportunity. Also, because some of the pilot projects demonstrated that the often the degradation of the batteries is way less than expected.
Yeah. Christopher Moore asked a question related, I think, to the response to the first question. And he asks, I don't quite understand the regulatory uncertainty around BESS, who is exempt from the tariffs and why.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't cover that fully. So today, um, there is an exemption of grid tariffs for BESS. So basically, normally under the current, let's say, or under the current scheme, there's not really an asset class for batteries, so they would be charged kind of like tax on the energy they draw from the grid and what they feed back. So they get this double taxation, and of course that would kill the business case. And right now, there's an exemption for all the assets being built and energized until August 29. And right now, um, the the legislature, the Bundesnetzagentur, so the ones who put out the regulatory schemes, they opened a consultation on what should be actually the successor of the current grid tariff scheme, and they're discussing various different aspects. But this is right now a little bit of the uncertainties of what will come, what will be the new grid tariff scheme after 29. And it's not going to be a full exemption as it is today. But actually the idea is, or what hopefully it's going to manifest, is that it's going to be a combination of a flexible grid connection plus you have an energy-based cost system. And that would actually provide, or let's say it would put forward an incentive to the best operator to charge, or let's say to support or to eliminate congestion in the grid. And actually it would highly benefit if you can eliminate congestion in the grid and charge according to a price signal that's given out by the grid operator. And that's actually going to be a nice upside of the new scheme. But nothing is clear, and of course the regulator made a little bit of a mistake and put out thought out loud whether old assets going to be grandfathered under the old scheme, and put out the option that it might not be the case. And then, of course, there was a Pandora's box was opened, and everybody got really, really nervous. And there's a huge discussion ongoing. Yeah. So that's a little bit of the kind of like the investment prohibitive situation. But yeah, we are very confident there's going to be a good scheme after 29.
Two more questions. The BESS rate of improvement is quite impressive. How are you dealing with that rate of improvement, given that a battery built today might quickly become obsolete?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, so I don't think it's going to become obsolete because the demand of flexibility or the demand of storage is outpacing the kind of like the drop of costs of batteries. And since the renewable build out will continue because the prices of renewable assets are just going to continue to drop, and now it's so cheap, and people, and especially now with all the energy crisis going on, I think we'll realize, hey, it might not be such a bad idea to be a little bit more independent from fossil fuels and generate more on the distribution level or more at home with plug-in solar, which is generally a very good development, but it's going to increase the kind of like the situation or the challenge for the grid operator. So the need for flexibility will rise as well.
Great. Scott Franklin asks, are you looking to expand in the US with your BESS?
This was one of the most asked questions in the last couple of years. And actually we said, so we didn't get asked if we want to expand to the States, but if we want to expand to other markets in Germany. And said, actually we don't feel we have a competitive advantage going to other markets because regulatory aspects are very, very complex. Grid connection schemes are very complex. And then if you don't speak even the local language, it's difficult. And so we are a really fast growing company already just to satisfy the German market. And right now there's a little bit of a challenge to not grow too fast and kind of lose your soul in the process. So we are very very aware of that.
And then Jeffrey Cohn writes, what kind of transition is required of utilities and their load management policies and forecasting? Will they need to make significant changes to the way they stack energy requests to various assets? For example, will they need to move away from gas-fired peaker plants as a high priority grid call?
Oh, that's a very loaded question. So let's start with the last part. Will they move away from gas-fired peaking plants? I mean, I don't dare to make a general statement to that because it highly depends on what's your local situation and what's the craziest challenge at hand. So I don't make a general statement on that. At least in Europe, if you throw in the whole permitting aspect and the prices of CO2 certificates, I think gas peaking plants are just, I mean, you can build them in theory quickly, but I think and that's right now a political debate in Germany, and I think it's just not very economic for the actual peaking aspect. However, it's a potential asset is currently discussed to cover kind of like low wind, low PV in feed periods that could last a couple of days, but not as a conventional day peaker. And I think I grasped one question in the beginning of the question in terms of like what utilities need to change for that transition. Um, I think one challenge might be, and it depends a little bit on the digitization levels, is like I said, we can turn data centers into flexible grid assets, and we could follow requests of the utilities to kind of help with congestion management in the grid. Well, that might also require the utility to make, let's say, give the best asset an indication, like when is actually a good time, like how do you want the best asset to behave, and whether you put out the price signal or whether you, yeah, I'm not sure. So this is a little bit, I think the might be the challenge for the utility to just generate the signal the best asset can follow. And that's actually what we realized with that one example I showed you in Germany, where the local DSO actually said, "Sorry guys, but I can't provide you this," and we built around it by creating a digital twin of the grid connection point, and actually said, "Okay, let's just give us some training data, and then we can build around it, and then we can proactively forecast what's going to be the grid situation, what's going to be the bottleneck, and let's say augment the power draw of the best asset accordingly."
Last question, and we'll call it a day. Larry Zaragoza appreciates the presentation, asks, are there public reports that we can read that outline the approach that you've presented today? Before you answer, Alexander, I'd like to say this is being recorded. Alexander's presentation will be posted on the NVRC homepage along with a recording of this. Alexander's contact information is on the last slide, and I would invite you to stay in touch with Alexander because that's really the purpose of these kinds of webinars. But Alexander, I'll let you fill in the missing parts to the response.
Yes. Mm, so the actual case I described today is not yet visible publicly. So I said Data was a huge opportunity for us, and it's actually the first time we put it out in the open. That this is something we believe in, and conceptualize the idea of the energy hub. But I'm sure there's going to be more publications around that in the near future. Yeah.
Fantastic. I just want to thank you so much for taking your time. It's late in Germany. It's close to dinner, and thanks for all our participants. We'll be in touch for sure, Alexander. I can promise you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks, Dave, for the opportunity, and thanks everyone for the lively questions. Uh, Hope you enjoyed the lunch break, and take care.
Yeah, this is great. It's freakishly German. We're perfectly on time. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye-bye.